Welcome back to my channel. I'm Electronic Wizard. I'm the electrical engineer who claims that I was taken out of my body and was taken to heaven back in the middle of July 1983. And I was given a tour of heaven by the man himself. You know who I'm talking about. And when he was done with me, he put me back into my body. And from that day forward, I've had a dual fascination between what they call internal evidence and external evidence. Internal evidence meaning what you find in the Bible about life. External evidence is that evidence that you find outside or what the scientific community discovers. The scientific community is constantly making these discoveries. And I'm very pinpointed in my approach, and I'm constantly observing and waiting for more insight as to what they're discovering, so that I can contrast that with the Word of God. And every now and then, when you do something like that, you make these sort of interesting discoveries and contrasts between internal and external evidence. But on rare occasions, you make a really profound insight, and that's what this video is all about. I do what I believe is my due diligence in studying this stuff. By the way, I use an acronym called DDLR. DLR stands for Debates, Documentaries, Lecture, and Read. And if you do that enough times, every now and then you sort of get a light bulb goes on, and you get a profound insight into something. And on rare occasions, you make this discovery and you sort of sit back and scratch your head and say, well, why hasn't anybody made this discovery before? Am I the only one? And so that's what I'm going to talk about in this particular video. If you ask the question, how long have human beings like you and me been living on this planet? And what I mean, then of course the question is what do you mean by human beings? Well, the last time that, people like us have made this because we've evolved after all, right? We're a product of evolution. And of course, evolution being a long, lengthy, drawn out process, it's very long, and you can't see the evolutionary jumps. So then you got to define, well, what does it mean to be a human? So I have to describe that. What I mean by a human being are people that have 2 arms, 2 legs, an eye, 2 eyes, nose, and a mouth. People that walk around with clothes on and that have been making drawings on cave walls, and are able to speak and articulate and talk. And that's what I mean by a human being. So the question then becomes, when is the last time we made that evolutionary jump to where we are now, human beings? How long ago was it that we've been living on this planet? How long have human beings like you and me been living on this planet? That seems like a reasonable question. And I've done my due diligence over the years, and you make certain discoveries and make certain conclusions to things. And my conclusions are not mine by myself. These are scientific conclusions. And I contrast the scientific conclusions by contrast that to the evidence and the material that you find inside the Word of God, the Bible. And so if you ask that question, of course, the answer that you get will depend upon who you ask. There's no one simple answer to that conclusion. And that's the basis of this particular video. And so depending upon who you ask, if you ask an anthropologist or an archaeologist or an ancient historian and so on and so forth, you get a wide-ranging number of views of how long we've been living on this planet. And the answers range between 100,000 years primarily to 300,000 years. So if you're going to, develop, let's say, the ubiquitous bell curve, you got your endpoints here, and you draw your ubiquitous bell curve. Let's bear with me here. I got the wrong tool. Huh. And you have these endpoints, and like anything else that you research, you always end up with the exceptions to the rule, or things that are outside the norm. But the bell curve would have, let's say, a starting point. You find, in most cases, it's 100,000 years to 300,000 years. That's what you're going to find. People like me and you have been living on this planet between 100,000 to 300,000 years. So obviously the middle point is the top of your bell curve. And you always have, as they say, outliers. And one of the major outliers that sort of sticks out like a sore thumb is that some people will tell you that we've been way out here, we've been living on this planet for 3 million years. So that's an outlier, and outliers I just sort of discard. And some will even say you go to the other extreme, way out here, you get to about 20,000 years or so. But the bulk of what you find, the vast majority of scientists, anthropologists, archaeologists, whatever, they're going to put it to about right here. That's what they're going to tell you. And so people like me and you have been living on this planet for approximately 200,000 years, or between 100 and 300,000 years. So now I'm a stickler for math, so let's do a little bit of math. But before we do that, then the next obvious question is when and where did the first known civilization arise? When and where? And the overwhelming answer and response that you get, of course, there's no definitive. You always get outliers in that as well. One of the outliers, by the way, as an example, is interestingly enough, is a place called Jericho, and they date that to about 8,000 years. There's a place in Armenia that dates back to about 2,000 years, and there's a group of islands in the Solomon Islands, and there's one cave in particular down there that has drawings on there that they date back to about 20,000 years. So 8,000, 10,000, 20,000 years are outliers. Those are the exception. The vast majority of thinking or research or conclusions, or call it what you will, the vast majority of the evidence indicates that the first known civilization began somewhere in Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. Okay, approximately, let's just round it off, around 5,000 years ago. And that's what you're going to find. About 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq, or Iran, if you will. Okay. By the way, that's where Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees. Ur, by the way, gives rise to the word Uruk, and there's the word Eric is in the Bible, and Eric in Iraq. If you want to know where the word Iraq comes from, ultimately Ur. That's it. Actually, Ur is an individual's name. He goes all the way back even before Abraham. So now the first known civilization began around 5,000 years ago. But notice, human beings, we're going to take the smaller number, and I'll tell you why in a second. So imagine that you and me, we've been living on this planet for 100,000 years. And the first known civilization began about 5,000 years. So if you do the math, if you take 100,000, so if you do the math, you take 100,000, okay, these are thousands, minus 5,000, you get 95,000 or 95,000 years. 95,000 years. That's how long people like me and you have been living on this planet. Now, what were we doing for that 90? Now, here's a question that you might ponder. What weren't people like you and me doing for 95,000 years that we began to do 5,000 million years ago? 5,000 years ago, excuse me. What weren't we doing for 95,000 years that we began to do 5,000 years ago? That's 95,000 years. Because in 5,000 years, look where man has come. We started out relatively small, maybe let's say 1 million people. Nobody knows exactly how many. I've looked at that. Nobody knows exactly how many people were living on this planet, 5,000 years ago. But there were, let's just round it off. Let's just say 1 million. That's just as good a number as anything else. So in 5,000 years, we went from 1 million people starting out in Mesopotamia 5,000 years later to modern day. As you can see, the clock here, okay, that's the date, today's date or time. We're in 2016. And so in 5,000 years, we went from about 1 million people, let's say, to 7.23 billion people. And we're all over the world in 5,000 years. And it kind of makes me wonder, I kind of sit back and scratch my head. Well, if we were able to do that in 5,000 years, what about the 95,000 years where scientists say we were hunter-gatherers? We were hunting and gathering. So we went around, 10,000, 20,000, 30, 40, 50, 90,000, 95,000 years. People like you and me been sort of etching out a life for ourselves. And all of a sudden, one day, a group of us decided, maybe we had better head on over there to Mesopotamia and start up a civilization. It's time to, get off our backs and do something with ourselves. So I've asked, and there are several profound questions one could ask, and I'm asking this one that sort of sticks out at me. What weren't we doing for 95,000 years? And that's, as you can see, why I picked 100,000. Because if you pick 300,000, it's even worse. I mean, going out here is even worse. So if you buy this number, or if you buy this number, 200,000, then you do the math. What weren't we doing for 95,000 years as a species, as a human species, that we began to do 5,000 years ago? That's obvious. One thing I can tell you happened, somehow, some way, our nature changed. We had a change of nature because all of a sudden we began to multiply like rabbits. Now, we weren't multiplying like rabbits, for 100,000 years for 95,000 years. We weren't doing much of anything. We certainly weren't building roads. We weren't building cathedrals. We weren't doing a whole lot of anything. And all of a sudden, after 95,000 years living on this planet, we decide to start up a civilization in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. And by the way, and to put that into biblical perspective, it just so happens that, Abraham, the father of the Christian Jews and the Muslims, came from Ur of the Chaldees, or Uruk, Iraq. He came from Ur of the Chaldees, and that's 4,000 years ago. Okay, and it is believed by many biblical theologians that the flood occurred approximately 4,350 years ago, or 350 years before Noah, which, by the way, is the exact number of years that Noah lived after the flood. He lived on for many, many, many years after the flood, and slowly after the flood, man's life expectancy began to drop off dramatically. And so it's a rather interesting, startling, in my opinion, a profound observation. Scientists are telling us that for 95,000 years, people like me and you have been wandering this planet as hunter-gatherers. And that's what they say. We're hunter-gatherers. How did we survive? How did we procreate? Did we live in families, in a family structure? The offspring? Where are the remains of these people? Where are their bones? Well, they got gobbled up in the flood, I guess. If you believe you have to, the remains of these people. Now, by the way, we say that it is stated that there's about 7.2 or so billion people living on this planet. But you can't imagine how many people that have come and gone already. How many people have actually died after being born on this planet? It must be in the trillions. And you got to, and for 95,000 years, where are all these remains? If you go from a handful of people 5,000 years ago to 7.23 billion people 5,000 years later, if that's man's nature, if that's the way we propagate, then what were we doing for 95,000 years? Nobody can answer that question. You can't answer that question, and I can't answer that question. You know why? Because it makes no sense. It's ridiculous. It's dumb. It's stupid. It's just it's a result of people not thinking very clearly. And the scientific community, because I've had this experience of being taken out of my body and going to heaven and spending some time in heaven and being given a tour of heaven by the man himself. If there's any lingering effect, and I hate using that expression, it would be one of the profound aspects profound, let's see, residual, um, lasting effect that had on me, if you will, I'm not afraid to ask questions. And I guess that's probably the most important thing that's happened to me. I am not afraid to ask questions. I ask the questions and I let the chips fall where they may. I don't care what discovery scientists make. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I'm not bothered in the least. They can tell you, by the way, scientists can tell you all day long, look you right in the face and tell you what the speed of light is, but they can't prove it. I don't know if anybody out there, if any of you people even know that. I could change the speed of light right now. I could tell you that it's a lot faster than what they're saying, and they can't disprove me because you cannot measure the speed of light directly. It's never been measured, never will be. I would point you to a very good article on Wikipedia, Einstein's Dilemma or Paradox. Search for Einstein's Paradox or Einstein's Dilemma. And it's, it might be a little in depth, but the bottom line is you cannot measure light directly. So they can tell you how big the universe is and how old the universe is, this and that and the other. Okay. But it doesn't bother me. I'm not bothered by these questions because I've been there and I've done that. The other effect I would say that it has on me, I'm the kind of because I've had this experience, I'm the kind of person that you could lock away in a 6x8 cell and leave me there, and I'll have a smile on my face until I'm content. I would be just as content in a 6x8 cell as I would be in a great elaborate, um, uh, Trump Towers, or in a huge whatever. So I would be just as content in a 6x8 cell as I would be anywhere. I don't need. There are a lot of travelers, world travelers on this planet. Well, when you've tasted filet mignon, you don't need to go run down to McDonald's and try to understand what meat tastes like. You've had the best. I'm not. I could care less about traveling. I've been to the best place I think you could possibly go, and so who cares whether or not what's around the corner? I could care less. They tell me that Hawaii is a very beautiful place to go and visit. Could care? I don't care. It's not any more beautiful than the place I went. I can tell you that much. I can't even compare. So yeah, don't need it. I don't need it. The computer that I'm on right now recording this is VR ready, virtual reality ready. So I'm hoping in the future, I would love to make VR clips. I'm hoping one day that I can record, and this is what I'm looking for. I'd love to record this to where you people listening could be viewing this in VR. Because I'm all ready for VR. So once again, I'm Electronic Wizard. I have a passion for electronics. I'm an engineer by trade. But the other hat that I wear is one of a Christian. I don't think there's a more profound human. You will not find a more profound person who has ever stepped foot on this planet than Jesus Christ. You're just not going to find anybody like that. You're not going to find anybody that can walk on water, raise people from the dead, heal people with blind eyes and deaf ears, who have compassion on the sick, compassion on those that may not be right in their mind. You're not going to find anybody like him. You're just not. Okay, he is it. And you people that haven't made that decision of picking up your cross and following me, Jesus said, if you haven't made that decision, you need to do it now. You need to do it right now. And in the future, I shortly, In the not too distant future, I fully plan on going into detail. And if you stay tuned, I will tell you everything that happened to me when I was taken out of my body and was taken to heaven and given a tour of the man himself. He was standing right here, off my left. He put his right hand on my right shoulder, and he said, Dave, I've got some things to show you. Let's get going. And he gave me a tour of heaven. And when he was done with me, he put me back into my body. And just one quick little insight to that. You may not, if you've never had this experience, you may not know this. But being taken out of your body and taken to heaven is just as smooth as butter. He has no problem doing it. It's very easy. He can do that at the blink of an eye, at a snap of a finger. He has no problem. The opposite, you must be aware, the opposite is not true. He's all thumbs, in my opinion. He hasn't perfected that art. He does not either. He does not like it. He doesn't want to do it. He has a problem doing it. It hurts him to a certain extent, taking people that are already in heaven and slamming them back down on earth and putting them back in their body. I'm telling you, he doesn't like that. Okay, he has a problem doing that, and he had a problem doing that with me, and he didn't want to do it, but he felt as though he had no choice. And when I hit planet Earth, and I remember, still recall falling through that, if you will, wormhole. It's not a wormhole. Okay, it doesn't curve. It's straight up and down, and it's all right here. And I remember seeing it, and it was a very long distance in a very short period of time. And that's another thing that we need to consider, time. Because time changes in terms of how fast and slow it is. Einstein proved that. Okay, and that's the crux of the problem when it comes to trying to figure out the age of the universe. You know, they say it's 14.45 billion years old. So there's other things to consider, and the one thing that they need to consider more than anything else is the time differential, what they call time dilation. So this is Electronic Wizard, and stay tuned. I've got a lot more to say, and I plan in the future I plan on going step by step into my experience when I was up there for not a long period of time, a rather short period of time. I wish I was still there right now. I wish he had put me back in my body, but that's what happened. So stay tuned. This is Electronic Wizard, and I'll see you in the next
And he's coming for you. Yes, he's gonna shoot you down. He's on your left, he's on your right. Better look around. Will he shoot you from behind? Or bring you light? See Gabriel at the gate, and Michael at his right. They say he's coming for you.